Talk politics. Ben Oquist and David Gazzard. Ben Oquist, Australia Institute. David Gazzard, DPG Advisory. The Nats, they're back in a big way under Barnaby Joyce. Is it a good political thing or tricky thing for Morrison, the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't underestimate Barnaby Joyce. He's been around a long time and everyone says he's got cut through and he connects. But a couple of quick things. 3 years is a long time ago and things change. I don't think you just kind of take yourself back there and think you'll just slot in. But of course, it's already causing mass chaos. Look what's happened to water policy today. The Murray-Darling Basin being blown up in the Senate. Two Liberals joining a press conference with the Greens and Labor and the crossbench to get stuck into it. So obviously it's causing problems already. And I think that's the thing. It's not necessarily an overwhelming positive for the coalition. It's going to cause them some troubles on their progressive flank. And yes, supposedly Barnaby Joyce is going to connect with people in Queensland and rural New South Wales, but there's a whole lot of people he doesn't connect with. Look at what's happening in South Australia with those moderate Libs. It's causing trouble in the coalition. I think it means that Bridget McKenzie can't have the water portfolio already. I think Veterans Affairs is more likely, something more minor. And then there's climate change. And yes, Barnaby is appealing to a coal constituency, but a dwindling one. And the thought that this is going to result in millions of dollars more going into CCS after we've spent $1.3 billion with nothing to show for it would be a travesty and just such bad public policy.
David Gazzard, that's a prospect, but I think that there is going to be a deal. The suggestion that net zero by 2050 was dead, I think, is premature because basically, to me, it looks like the opening negotiation that they're putting up, that they say we want to be heard, essentially.
And you got to understand that the Liberal and National parties hold almost all of the regional seats in Australia at the moment. So it is not unusual for members to be standing up for their constituencies. In fact, it's quite healthy. And for the members in Adelaide at the end of the Murray-Darling, where they've often got to pick up the water that comes through after everyone's had a crack at it, they ought to be standing up for their constituents as well. So this is the difference between the coalition philosophically and Labor and the Greens. There is no forced collective view. Members are entitled to speak for their constituencies and argue hard. And Barnaby Joyce knows how to do that. But I don't...
You know the Prime Minister well. Would he be watching those developments this week from the lodge in quarantine, worried or slightly maybe, emboldened about the political prospects?
He would be completely realistic about the way that the National Party is going to stand up for core constituencies that they hold. And agricultural policy and water policy have always been really, really key to them. They have the lion's share of seats where it depends on water. There are some Liberal Party members out there as well that will argue strongly for it.
But is it a net gain? Is it a net gain for the government to have Joyce, who we say is a good retail politician, to have him back?
I think so. And I actually agree with Ben on this. 3 years is a long time. We've both been around for a long time. I was lucky enough to work for John Howard. And people had written off John Howard. He turned out to be one of our most successful prime ministers because you learn from your mistakes over time. And the Barnaby that I saw fronting the cameras, you could see he's had a scarifying experience and he wants to move forward with that. And I think people owe him the opportunity to do that.
I saw John Howard, though, on TV the other night, kind of boasting about the stability that his government provided, that it had the same Treasurer and the same Foreign Minister all the way through his term. I don't think you're obviously getting that with this government, and Barnaby's not the kind of stabilising influence that John Howard's talking about that supposedly, and Scott Morrison mentioned this the other day.
Don't fool yourself. There were plenty of fights, right?
Of course,
as people advocated for their constituencies internally, and I worked for both the Prime Minister and the Treasurer in that period, and there were plenty of fights over large issues. That is part of good government, is people sit around the cabinet table and they slug it out to get the best outcome. That's what you expect them to do.
This is happening in the public. And I think what's underestimated is that Joyce doesn't play to all constituencies. And I think what we haven't heard yet is there'll be some grumblings on the Liberal moderate side over what Barnaby... We've seen the first skirmish today of what it's doing to moderate Liberals in South Australia. But
We've seen a bit of a skirmish from Labor too with Joel Fitzgibbon.
Yeah, indeed.
On renewable energy.
Yeah, Joel is not helping the Labor Party at all. We need to have a good policy, and I agree with you about the net zero by 2050. I actually think Barnaby there makes a deal on net zero by 2050 more likely, not less likely. I think the danger, though, is what the policy outcome from that is going to be. And if Andrew's right, Andrew Clennell, I heard him earlier talking about millions of dollars more for CCS, that's a terrible public policy outcome.
When you look at the Prime Minister...
I just think, I mean, Fitzgibbon is a perfect example of this, and Mel Swanston is caught in the same position because the Labor Party has veered far too far to the left. They need green preferences with a primary vote in the low 30s. In Queensland, it's in the high 20s. They cannot win without green preferences. They know they have to move to the right, but they can't. Their inner city constituencies won't let them do that. And now you have the fracture point around the Hunter where Fitzgibbon is calling some of their policies insane.
If the PM were to backstep on climate, he would also face vulnerabilities in Liberal metro seats.
Look, you've got to walk a tightrope on this, and I think this is where the parties find themselves. And to your point about this being the opening gambit in what is going to be a longer
policy for one
play.
second.
Just quickly.
We don't want to waste all this money on CCS. I've just went through how much has been wasted on coal CCS, and now Chevron and the Gorgon plants got their hand up for $60 million from the government, and that's completely failed. So let's get the policy solutions that drive climate change, not exacerbate it.
Ben, Oquist, David Gassard, gents, thanks as always, appreciate it.
20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.